Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Greg, your co-host of the Grilling to Get Away podcast, and I got a special edition for you today. I'm joined with somebody that I've been following on YouTube for a while, and I'm excited that he reached out because he wanted to be on the podcast to talk about his book, Primal Cuts. But I'm here with Brad Baych. Did I say that okay?
Yes, you did. Yeah, you did. You got it.
Great. Yeah, no, Brad, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. You got just a wealth of knowledge that I'm excited to share with our listeners and our followers. But for those that might not know who you are, why don't you just kind of, give us a little bit of a bio about who you are and what you're doing now?
Yeah. My name is Brad Baych, and I am the Butcher Wizard on YouTube. So about 3 years ago, I started to put some videos on YouTube about how to get regular cuts from like a Costco or a Sam's or something like that, and how to cut them and save a bunch of money. And they kind of blew up on YouTube, and then kind of push forward from there. My background is I've been to culinary school. I taught culinary school. I've been in restaurants and butcher shops. I've pretty much done everything you could think of in the food business. I've done it at one point or another. So again, just in the last couple of years, just taking everything I've learned and putting it on YouTube and teaching just to the masses, to a lot of people, how to get the most out of the way that meat is sold in the United States, whether you're buying at a grocery store or a big box store, like a big membership club, just how to save money at all the different ways that meat is sold. So that's kind of like my little short view.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it because going through your YouTube, some of your videos and stuff, it's all about how to save the consumer some money and also educating as well. So I love that piece of it, and that's kind of what we do here as well. A lot of our listeners are kind of maybe first time or amateur backyard barbecuers and grillers. So sharing tips and strategies and how to save money and get the most bang for your buck, especially nowadays, is key. And I was going through kind of your book here, Primal Cuts. And if you're listening, we'll post all these links in the show notes and stuff like that, so you can follow Brad and you can find his book. But I know you're talking about your culinary background, but you started kind of doing soups, right?
Yeah. So in the very, very beginning, when I was 16, my first job ever was a soup restaurant that was in my local town. And it was kind of a funny story because I was going to go bag groceries like everyone else of my friends. And I didn't get that job for some reason. They must have all filled up. And then I found this other place that had just opened, and they were hiring anyone who would walk in. And I came in, they're like, "Hey, do you want to do soups?" I'm like, "Sure, why not?" And that was I bit the bug of the restaurant business or the food business in general, and never looked back. So, I tried to do some other things earlier in my life, but I kept coming back to the restaurant business, to the food business. And then, so again, it was an interesting experience, but again, I always come back to food.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it started early for you. You got started early, 16. And then, I found it interesting too, because, no matter where you're at or what you're doing, like you kind of found your way to the grill, right? So you started like soups, and then, eventually you found your way to a steakhouse, and that's kind of what hooked you on the meat piece, right?
Yeah. So when I that next job after I was out of high school, or kind of like my senior in of high school, I got a job that I probably was not equipped for at all. Like again, part of my part of my earlier career is just kind of like trying to do stuff and just seeing if people will say yes. And then, so I got my way into a job that I probably was not qualified for, at a fine dining steakhouse. And that's where I really fell in love with meat in general. I was working the saute line at night, and then I would come in the morning and work with some of the prep cooks. And that's where I kind of like learned that butchery art of like, the guy, the story in the book is like, it was Angel, who was the prep cook, and he would be involved in all the morning stuff, cleaning all the tenderloins, strips, ribeyes. And I would just come in and watch him. And then eventually I was helping him. And then eventually I kind of like jumped into some of his days off, and then got even into being a full-time kind of cutting meat full-time. So it kind of evolved over the years, but that was definitely the first time I was like, man, the coolest thing is to watch somebody who is really good at a specific task that they've done thousands and thousands of times. And to watch them do it is really like poetry in motion. It's really an art form. So that really made me fall in love with that meat, with the meat butchery process.
Yeah, no, and I love it that now you're paying it forward, right? So you learned from Angel there, and now you're teaching thousands of people online doing your YouTube thing, and now your book as well. So that's awesome. And now tell me about, like, so you start you start in the kitchen, you kind of work your way up, you kind of learn the process, you go to culinary school, and then you start working in kind of higher end, so to speak, restaurants and kitchens. What was that experience like?
Yeah, so kind of after that, so I went to culinary school. I got a great job in Dallas as a banquet cook for a 5-star or 4-star hotel managed on Turtle Creek, which is great experience. But it was kind of like the Navy SEALs of cooking, where it was like, sure, we are working, not that it was to compare it to the Navy SEALs, but it was like my own version. But like, yeah, we worked 12 hours a day. It was a very intense, very high end deal. Just doing anything that anyone would tell me to do, basically. And but after that, I taught culinary school for a little bit, and that was where I was able to kind of use a lot of the things that I had learned over the years. And that meat butchery class was my favorite class to teach. I did teach some other ones, which were cool too, but like that meat butchery class and teaching people who are just into the culinary field how to merchandise, or how to break down a large cut of meat into a bunch of smaller cuts of meat and utilize those in menus, really was beneficial for everybody. I mean, I think we really that's kind of the basis of it, because I feel like once you teach something to many times to some people, then you like fully understand it, because people they make certain mistakes and you gotta correct them, or they've asked the same questions over and over again. It really allows you to be able to teach better, just for the sheer amount of time you've gone over the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. You do it so many times that it just becomes kind of second nature for you. So tell me like a little bit more. So you transition then to, sharing what you know to an online audience. And I looked this morning before we came on, and that YouTube video you were talking about, the first one that went viral for you, I think it was up to like 4.4 million views. Yep. That's kind of crazy. So, talk to me a little bit about like, what was the inspiration for you sharing that information, and how did you really come up with that idea to with that video?
Yeah, so this is kind of like several years later. I've been a stay-at-home dad. I have 4 kids. And then I kind of wanted to get back into teaching and into the food business. But I didn't have the availability to like jump into a restaurant or anything like that. So I was like, okay, I'll throw some videos on YouTube and see what happens. Not really expecting anything. My 8th video ever was that ribeye video that you're talking about, where it got to 1 million views in 4 days, and it was my 8th video. So I know it's kind of like I hit a chord somewhere with people, because I'm like, I didn't know what I was doing. And I just took a whole ribeye from Costco and I showed people how easy it was to cut it down and how much money they would save by cutting it themselves rather than buying it at a grocery store. So I think we end up saving like $80 or something, $90 on all those ribeyes. And like that video kind of blew up, and so we just I did it again. I did it with a strip and a tenderloin, and then did it with, I've done all kinds of things now. I think we're up to almost 200 videos or so. So I've done a lot of stuff that you can buy at Costco or these big box stores. I've done the whole gamut. I tasted frozen hamburgers one time. That was a fun video. But just so it's been a lot of fun. The YouTube game is definitely its own animal, but I really like the teaching aspect of it, and the comments are for the comments that are positive are really good. Like people just really want to know, have actual questions, and just kind of trying to help people out. And save money, because right now, meat is crazy prices, and it's like, you, as a butcher, you got to kind of like find those secret cuts, those off cuts that people don't know about. It's getting harder and harder because all those cuts are getting more and more like publicized, so they're getting more expensive. But yeah, it's all about saving people money. That's really my thing.
Yeah, no, I love that about your page. Is you got a lot of videos out there with how to save people money by buying kind of in bulk, those bulk cuts, and butchering themselves a little bit and cutting it down. And a lot of that is in your book. Most of that's in your book here, Primal Cuts. So tell me kind of then the process for how you started. Like, you started YouTube, you were doing that for a while, and then you're like, okay, maybe it's time for me to share this knowledge like in a physical book. What did that look like?
Yeah, so it was a pretty interesting story with the book, with the cookbook. I was taking a course on getting better at YouTube, and a person, the leader of the course, pulled me up and said, "Hey, learned about my channel and said like, hey, you should do a cookbook." And he's like, "You should do a cookbook where each chapter is kind of a different cut of meat, and then you do recipes." And I filed that away as like, sure, I'm not going to probably have a chance to do a cookbook. And then it was about another year later, I was approached by a publisher and said, "Do you have any cookbook ideas?" And I'm like, "Oh, I got one." And sure enough, they're like, they love the idea, and we moved forward on it. Yeah, so that's how the Primal Cuts Cookbook came to be. So each chapter is a different primal cut. And then so each chapter I show you how to break it down, and then all the recipes for that chapter are for the cuts from that primal cut. So we have a chuck chapter, so I'll talk to I'll show you how to break it down, and then also how to use the Denver steak and the chuck eye and the terrace major and the other off cut, or all the cuts that come from that primal cut, and just do recipes from it. So it was really a cool idea, or a cool bringing together of all of the recipes that I've amassed throughout my career, and bring the butchery and the recipes together.
Yeah, there's definitely a ton of recipes in here, which I love. But like, before you get to the recipes, you really break it down, kind of educating the reader about the types of cuts of meats, flavor versus tenderness, and then also equipment and things like that you would recommend somebody that's maybe at home starting out, what they would have. So, a couple questions for you. One, how would you explain flavor versus tenderness as somebody that might not understand that or know about that just yet?
Yeah. So when you look at the different cuts on a cow, they are, you have different ones that have more flavor and more or less tenderness. And they're kind of on like a teeter-totter almost. So if you have more flavor, usually it's less tenderness. So you're going to have a tougher cut of meat that's going to be more flavorful. Think about like a short rib. It is a tough cut of meat, but when you treat it right, it has a very delicious, deep, beefy flavor to it. Where on the inverse, you maybe have like a beef tenderloin, which is the most tender cut of meat, like a filet mignon. And it's the most tender cut of meat, but it lacks a little bit on the beefy flavor aspect of it. So usually you have this teeter-totter of, you can either have flavor or tenderness. And there are a few special cuts or select cuts that have a little bit of both, and those are the ones that I like to build around.
Yeah. What are some of those cuts?
Yeah, so I love the some of the cuts out of the chuck. So that's kind of, if I had to pick one primal cut to eat for the rest of my life, it would be everything that comes out of the chuck. So you have the chuck eye steak, which is basically an extension of the rib eye. So the rib and the chuck section are next to each other on the cow, and then you have a little bit of the rib eye that is in the chuck. So you get all the benefits of the rib eye, but you get it for a chuck price. And there's only like 2 to 3 or 4 steaks in the chuck. But if you can find it or cut it yourself, it really you really get to benefit from the ribeye for like half the price. I think, there's also, like on the chuck, you have the flat iron, which is one of my favorites. It is a great cut that you can do dry heat cooking with, so grilling or sautéing or searing or whatever. It stays really tender and is really flavorful. The Terrace Major is another one. It's almost like a little tenderloin. It's a very tender cut of meat, but because it's in the chuck, it has more flavor. It's smaller, and there's not that, there's only 2 on the whole cow, so you got to they're a little harder to find, but you're well worth your search if you can find one.
So you mentioned a few times, like in the book and then here on the podcast recently, about the Denver steak. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Like, where can you find that? And tell me a little bit more about that cut.
Yeah. So the Denver steak, another one of those. That's an awesome steak out of the chuck. Again, I'm a chuck fan. So when you take the whole chuck, there's the subprimal cut that comes off of the chuck is the chuck roll. And you can get that at a Costco or a Sam's or anywhere that cuts their own chuck roast. But if you do a little bit extra butchery, which isn't very hard, but you got to know where this muscle is, you take it out, you can get 5 to 6 Denver steaks, and they're beautiful. They're like well marbled. They can be dry heat cooked, so you can do them on the grill or saute pan. It kind of is comparable to a New York strip, but it's even more well marbled. But it's a great cut of meat. And if you can find one in the grocery store, it's going to be less than some of your more retail or your more premium retail steak cuts.
Okay. And that's not really a common one, at least from my understanding of finding in retail.
Yeah, you can kind of. I have one grocery store that I know sometimes has them. The way you can definitely ensure that you can get one is to get a chuck roll and cut it yourself. Again, it takes a little bit of know-how and a little bit of tutorial, but it's not that hard to do. And with the chuck roll, I think I bought my last chuck roll here. I'm in South Carolina, and I bought the last one at $7 a pound. So you're getting all those cuts in the chuck for $7 a pound, which is way cheaper than you're going to find anywhere else.
Right. Yeah. And that's the advantage of kind of doing it yourself, is you save a little bit of money. And you break it down pretty good in the book about how to butcher it yourself. So if you're interested in doing something like that, make sure you pick up Primal Cuts by Brad. But so let's say somebody is starting, interested in doing it. They got your book. What are kind of the key pieces of equipment that they might need to get started?
Yeah, so it's pretty simple. You need a big cutting board. So that's one thing that some people might not have. But the cutting board I use is 20 inches by 15 inches, and I feel like that's a good size because it still fits in a cabinet, but it is big enough to do some of these bigger projects. Some good knives is also a good thing to do. If you have a 8-inch, 10-inch chef's knife, you're going to be good to go. If you don't, I would suggest if you're going to do a big strip or ribeye or something like that, that you get I love my 10-inch breaking knife. I have to say, in full transparency, that I do have a 10-inch breaking knife and a 6-inch bowie knife on Amazon for Butcher Wizard. Yeah. But those are great tools to use. Like I said, the 6-inch bowie knife is also a great tool. But you may I find a lot of people, if you get that, that knife block you may got when you got married, it has a bunch of knives in it that you haven't pulled out. Yeah. One of them might be a boning knife. So it usually it has a thinner blade. And it's, like I said, the blade's about 6 inches long, and it lets you get kind of around some of those muscle groups. So those are kind of the basic equipment. I would say optional is a vacuum sealer, because we're going to cut a whole ribeye. You're going to get 14 ribeyes out of there. So unless you are super hungry, you're going to probably not eat 14 ribeyes in a timely fashion. So having a way to vacuum seal them is also a great way to extend that shelf life, so you don't end up throwing this stuff away, because we're trying to save money. So I think those are pretty, if we want to go other optional stuff, a meat grinder is great to go ahead and take the scraps from these projects and grind them into the most delicious ground beef hamburger you've ever had in your life. It's fresh. Yeah. It's got all these different cuts in it if you do it right. And it's just, now I think that I'm done. But that's like the basics of equipment. But like, man, you can go off the rails with equipment, all with everything, right?
Yeah, you can do that. Yeah, pretty quick. But like that, I like those ideas for someone just getting started. Now, I got to ask you. You know, you're in this world. You know, aside from the Denver steak, which we just talked about, maybe what's maybe one of your most underrated cuts?
Oh yeah, so opposed to all the ones I've talked about, so I'll get out of the chuck. We'll get some other places. I love when I can get a hold of one. A tri-tip is great. I know it's not underrated. A lot of people know about tri-tips, but like I'm in South Carolina, East Coast. We don't get that many tri-tips, so when I see one, I jump on it.
We're saying here in the Midwest, you know, we don't see it too often.
I think they keep them all in California. You know,
I
all
know,
the
right?
rest. I went to a conference in Salt Lake City, and I went to the biggest Costco in the world. So they have basically a business center and a regular Costco in the same place.
Yeah.
And they had a whole section, a whole refrigerated section of tri-tips. And I'm like,
Okay.
this is why I can't ever get one in South Carolina, because they don't ever make it east.
Yeah, I know.
But so those are really obviously really good. Let's see, what else do we have? See, I'm blanking. What I like to do too, like this is just a different way to cut a New York strip. I love it's called a Manhattan fillet, and a lot of people don't think about this, but usually like when you're cutting the strip yourself, you get really thin New York strips because they're wide, right? They're big and wide. So if you end up really cutting that New York strip lengthwise in half, you take the two pieces and basically one of them looks like a little fillet. You kind of cut it into like a little fillet, but it has that character of the New York strip. So it's called a Manhattan fillet. And you can cut it thicker, but this is something that you're going to have to cut yourself, because I don't know if I've ever seen one, you know, outside of cutting it yourself or like a steakhouse. But those are kind of a cool thing to do. So again, going to butchery only projects, right? Like
yeah. So these are things that you can take it upon yourself to go out and get a hunk and carve it up yourself. So in the book, you know, you got a lot of great recipes in there, but if you had to pick one, which one would you say is your favorite?
Yeah, I love a lot of the things that I make a lot of for my family. Is I love the London broil marinade is one that my kids ask for a lot. So you can use that same marinade with a lot of different cuts of meat, but it's balsamic and Worcestershire. So it has a really good base flavor. Me personally, I make the most out of the book is like the beef jerky. So I will try to have a bag of beef jerky at all times. Again, taking a round or an eye of round, inside round, outside round, something like that. That the jerky marinade there is really good. Also, one of my favorite sauce recipes or like steak recipes was the steak au poivre, and that's one that came from that first steakhouse that I worked at. It's a brandy green peppercorn sauce over a New York strip, and that's really good too. So I think those are kind of some of my go-tos that I would like. Okay, if I had to pick a couple in there, that would be the one. But yeah, it was definitely fun trying to like figure out all these recipes, because it's really hard to do a cookbook already, because you get like they want to do 100 recipes or 80 to 100 recipes, and then I pigeonholed myself into just doing beef, and then it's like, okay, now I need 100 beef recipes, and how do we do that? And then my wife took all the pictures, which was awesome, and she goes, "How am I supposed to take another picture of a brown piece of meat? How am I supposed to make this look good?" You know, so it was a fun project.
She did a great job, because the pictures are outstanding in here. No, that's awesome. I appreciate you sharing that. And, beef jerky is right up our alley. We just, we talk about that quite a bit here, especially kind of, with wild game like venison and stuff like that. So I'm sure that marinade would do well for that too. Okay, Brad. Well, I appreciate you coming out. We got a couple minutes left, so um, we'll post in the notes where people can find you. But any last minute thoughts or tips from the book or just in general that you see as you're out there doing this stuff all the time over there on YouTube?
Yeah. So basically, my parting tips are just to give it a try. I think most people think that the butchery world is very complicated, and it's really not that complicated. You just got to get in there and try and use a tutorial like on YouTube or in the book, and then work your way around. And the more times you do it, the better. The easier it's going to be. You're going to get so much satisfaction from doing a whole project and being like, man, I did that myself. And it's just a fun hobby to do, and you save a bunch of money. And I say, even if you mess it up, you still can make dinner out of it. We can always grind it up and make hamburgers if we need to.
Yeah,
So
that's right. Yeah, great tip. You can still cook it and eat it, right?
that's right.
Thank you so much. And where can people find you again?
Yeah, so I am Butcher Wizard on YouTube. That's my main place of on the internet. I'm on Instagram and some Facebook and other things. We also have the Primal Cuts Club, which is my private members only community, and that's primalcutsclub.com. So that's where I kind of teach people individually or in a small group, how to do what I do. And yeah, so we're everywhere. We're just keep pumping out YouTube videos and helping people, and that's kind of the whole game.
Well, yeah, no, that's great, and I know people appreciate it. And you can find Brad's book "Primal Cuts" out there on Amazon. Again, we'll post a link to everything in the show notes, so you can go and find it. But Brad, thank you so much for coming on and sharing some of your knowledge with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for allowing me to get a couple minutes with your audience. I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, no problem. Take care.
Thank you.